Hi, my name is Kitz. I was invited to speak to you about my practice as well as experimental typography by Professor Irwan Harnoko, and I'm going to share a presentation with you. So in this cover page, you can see work that hangs in my office space. I teach at Suffolk University here in Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. I'm an artist, a curator of design and design exhibitions. I'm also a professional graphic designer with over 30 years of experience, and I teach and manage the graduate program at Suffolk University. So I consider myself, among all of these titles, a maker. My practice consists of commercial work as well as experimental work, and as I mentioned, teaching. So let's take a brief look at some of the commercial work that I'm doing over the years. So in the commercial space, I'm generally working to develop marks for clients in the branding space. So things that might be referred to as brand marks or logos. I'm looking to amplify their client strategic needs as well as their storytelling through this making. Here's a collection of marks. You can see that these marks are made in a variety of different ways. Some of them purely in Illustrator, others involve texture making and shape manipulation that may happen outside of the software. So this is something that I utilize in my poster making techniques as well. And I'll talk about that a little more on the future slide. Here's an additional slide of that type of work. And you can see here even more work that's dealing with textures that happen outside of the computer. So naturally made textures or textures that are made through a process of scanning, as well as some hand-generated type or type that's made through manipulation of objects. So in the experimental space, through experimental investigations, I'm fostering my continued growth as a maker. The outcomes of these activities ultimately do inform client work in some way, shape, or form, and they certainly inform the teaching that I do. I am classically trained, and I enjoy typography. Typography is my favorite material of design, but at times this is perfectly sufficient and other times it isn't. So some subject matters require type that bends and breaks and contorts in order to result in a stronger image. To me, mere legibility is not always my primary objective. Curiosity and continuous exploration are core tenets of my making, and trial and error, testing and iteration are central to my process. And I mentioned in my notes that it will be distributed to you that I think that these are the rationale of why to teach experimental design. So oftentimes experimental design might not be the direct result of what you're going to provide to a client, but they can be part of the root process of getting to that result. So I started this project, which is called the 365 Project, where I make a poster every day. So 7 days a week, every day of the year. Started this in 2014, and there have been over 5,000 entries to this project. It's important for me to always note that this project is not a diary. I think it would be very boring if I were just making posters that were about my point of view or my life. So these topics range a whole slew of different things, from social and political topics, and environmental topics, as well as personal things. So this is a purely experimental space. It has nothing to do with, generally nothing to do with client work. Unfiltered, it's a creative outlet. Posters are created within a 24-hour time period each day, and they measure 70 by 100 centimeters, which is a pretty standard poster size internationally. So my growing university and client needs have impacted this project somewhat. So in recent years, some of the things that I get invited to do, so exhibitions and invitationals, will also have to reside in this space. That does not change the level of creativity that I put into them or the level of experimentation that I put into them, but I do, in these cases, have to follow a brief that's supplied to me. So my experimental mantra is nothing is precious and everything is material. Certainly life is precious, certainly our relationships with people are precious, but from the standpoint of making inside of this experimental space, anything can be material. So my work has very fortunately been chronicled in periodicals, books, exhibitions, and collections throughout the US and all of these wonderful countries that have invited me to share my work there. And again, I'm grateful to all of the curators and jurors and fellow designers and colleagues and friends who've invited me to be a part of exhibitions in their countries. So let's talk about typography and how I work with typography. So in these two images, you can see type that is purely generated inside of the computer. I would say this is a vector-based type. I'm selecting the typeface and setting the type. But I would consider these, even though they are more on the, I would say, minimal side or simpler side of my experimental work, I would consider them experimental in the way that you have to engage to read them. They're not just strictly set up so that you can have an easy, simple editorial read. You have to spend some time with them. And I like this idea of posters where you have to spend time with them to discover them and discover what's happening with them. So here you can see type that's doing some similar things, but then also it's becoming a little maybe more challenging, more decorative, more artistic, and you have to spend a bit more time with this to be able to understand what's being said. So there's some pragmatic type here for sure, but then there's also some type that's becoming more illustrative and becoming more image-based.